Am I going to be able to improve this guitar's tone, this Fender Squire Affinity Telecaster? Well, there's really no way to know until we establish an as-is tone state of this guitar. So stay tuned for that. I'll see you in just a moment. Hi, and welcome back where my motto is keep it real. A real quick recap of what's going on here. I have a personal journey going on where I am trying to modify, customize this guitar, this Squire Affinity Telecaster. I don't know what I'm doing. I've said that many times. I have no experience doing it. So this is likely to be a journey fraught with mistakes and setbacks and a lot of learning. And I'm just recording this and memorializing this journey of mine. This week is Tone Test Week. This is actually the week of videos I have been dreading because I am not a very good player. I'm a hobbyist, I'm an amateur, but I'm going to have to bite the bullet and do some kind of playing to establish the current tone of this guitar just to see if things are improving along the way. This video is going to be in three distinct parts. Part number one, I'm going to play the guitar as is, aside from tuning it up, of course, which I'm sure it does need. Second, I'm going to change the strings, and I'm going to do a very, very simple setup. And then, third of all, I will do a second tone test to establish a second bass line. And then next week, we're actually going to be starting the actual mods, which I'll get into later about exactly what I'm going to do as a refresher. Before I play, it's important that I establish what my sound settings are going to be so that I can replicate those every time I do a tone test going forward. I'll start with the guitar and go from there. Starting with the guitar, I'm simply going to have the tone and the volume settings down here on the control panel maxed out. I know a lot of similar videos to this. They like to go incrementally with the tone and the sound and really get it fine-tuned and fine-controlled. But again, I just don't want to go that far. The guitar's output goes into a series of pedals I have. Now, they're basically all pass-through, so there's not going to be any adjustment to the tone on the guitar. All that really matters is the output goes into a pedal tuner I have, so I can get it tuned up, and then it passes through some other pedals. They don't matter. Ends up with an ABY switch because one of the outputs of the ABY switch goes to my amp. The amp I'm going to use is appropriate because it's a Fender amp. I have a Fender 65 Deluxe Reverb. I'm going to plug into the vibrato channel, channel 1, but I'm not going to use any vibrato. I'm not going to use any reverb. I'm going to set the bass to 1 because this is a very bassy amp to me. And literally, for my ears, even on setting 1 for the bass is plenty of bass. So I'm going to leave that in 1. I'm going to set the treble to a nice kind of middle range of 5. And I'm going to set the volume control to 3 or 4. I haven't decided yet. We'll see what I end up for a clean sound. But then to get a bit of a dirty sound, I'm going to be sitting there maybe around 8. So I'll play around with those and see what seems to work. Before I do any tone tests going forward, I'll make sure that my amp is warmed up at least a half an hour to get those tubes nice and warm. I do have an attenuator attached to the amp. That's because I have to keep the noise level down to a reasonable level here where I live. But nevertheless, I'm going to establish very firm settings on the attenuator as well. For my clean playing, I'm going to establish the decibel level at -15, and for the dirty tone, I'm going to establish the decibel level at -35. For the amp microphone, external microphone, I'm going to be using a Sennheiser E609 silver, and I hope I say this right, super carotenoid dynamic microphone. I'm going to position the microphone on the mid left side of the speaker to hopefully pick up the low, mid, and high tones of the speaker in general. From the microphone, I run it into an audio interface, a Volt 276, into one of the channels, and from there I move it along into my computer where it finally hooks up into my DAW. The DAW that I'm using is Ableton Live 11. I don't plan on doing any post-recording enhancements whatsoever. Obviously, I want to keep the raw nature of the tone intact so we can track it along the way, hopefully getting better. Now, in terms of what I'm going to play to capture the tone, I'm going to break that down into three obvious areas: chords, solos, and riffs. Let's talk about each one of those a little bit more. In terms of chords, I'm just going to play some simple open chords, some simple bar chords. I'm going to probably stay in the keys of A, D, E, G, maybe some minors thrown in. I'm only going to do the neck pickup and the bridge pickup. I'm not going to do in between. And that's just, again, to keep it simple, and we'll see what the extreme of both sides of the pickups sound like. As for the solos, I'm going to be playing a simple scale. I'm going to be playing the pentatonic blues scale only because I think I know that the best. And I want to minimize any screw-ups on my part. And I'll play that in A minor, so we're kind of up here in the middle of the fretboard, and in E minor, so we're kind of up in the upper register of the fretboard as well. And I'll play those both dirty and clean, and I'll play those both with the neck pickup and the bridge pickup. Then as far as the riffs, as I mentioned, I'll play a handful of them. Don't know how many yet, just a handful, just to get an idea. I'm not going to name them for you here. It doesn't really matter. Hopefully some you may recognize, and that'll wrap it up. Hi there. I'm very sorry about interrupting the video right here. This is actually in the future compared to where you were in the video. I messed up some way. Actually, I'm not really sure how I messed up. What's important to let you know is that my attempt to record the as-is tone of my guitar ended up being failures. I don't think it's the end of the world, actually. So now, the first baseline tone test, the one that I will use to compare against all future tone tests, will be the tone test I do after I did the setup and the string changes, which I did yesterday. So today I will redo the tone test. I guess the good news is I'm getting better and better at doing the tone test. Thank you for being understanding about this. I appreciate it. But I did warn everyone at the beginning of this video series that this is the first time I've tried something like this, and it was bound to be rough around the edges and that I would make mistakes. So here we go with the third tone test. It's really not meant to be musical whatsoever. It's just meant to be functional in that I get the bass line for future tone test. Okay, let's get on with it. But now that I've been through the setup, I want to tell you a little bit about what you're going to see. So first, what new strings did I use? I decided to stay within the Fender vibe, you might say. Specifically, I put on Fender original 150s, pure nickel wound, gauge 9 to gauge 42. I've never used Fender strings before. I've used a number of other brands, so this will be interesting to me to see what I think. Now, I had a couple struggles, unexpected struggles. My first struggle was dealing with the split tuner post, which I've never dealt with before. Fortunately, I removed all the strings, not thinking to pay attention to how the strings attach to those kinds of posts. Now, I thought I knew what to do, but when I tried to attach the strings to the post, I realized that I had no clue. The challenge was that I cut the high E string way too short and didn't have enough lead wire to wrap it around the post. And so I had to break open a new pack of those strings and pull out the E string and do it again. You'd think that I had never restrung a guitar before, but that's untrue. I have many times. But for whatever reason, maybe there's the pressure of the video, I don't know. But the next thing I did wrong was remove the strings and then check the relief of the fretboard, which is of course incorrect. You want your strings on with that tension to see what your relief is. There seems to be two schools of thought when it comes to neck relief. Seems to be those that advocate for a little neck relief, which seems to be most people. But then there seems to be a minority of people that suggest that the neck can be perfectly straight if you want. Now, I'm kind of convinced by those that advocate to have some neck relief. So it turns out that the guitar had just a little neck relief in it, just a slight amount, very close to straight, but not quite. So I'm going to live with that. The next struggle I had was regarding those strings being misaligned to the neck. After I adjusted the saddles, it was still misaligned. Then I decided to do what I learned from a YouTuber, which is to loosen the neck bolts slightly and then carefully nudge the guitar neck back into place. Now, in my case, it did seem to work. However, I don't think the strings are still quite exactly right. Probably what I'll do is when I take the guitar down to Sean for all the electric and pickup work in future videos, I'll just have him take a look and see if he can't get that better. Now, my last struggle was with intonation. I have adjusted intonation on my guitars before. In this case, I just could not get that A exactly right. Finally decided it was close enough. That's my story of the setup I did that you're going to be seeing here in just a second. What do I mean by setup in our situation here today? It's a very simple setup. You don't want to use me as your model to learn how to do setups. There are a million better videos on YouTube to find that kind of information. I do want to record the simple setup I'll do. I will speed it up during the actual work so nobody has to laboriously go through and watch me do a poor setup here. But that said, it's going to be fun for me to try. And the main thing I'm interested in, of course, are the strings, because the strings are pretty dull. They're pretty dead as far as I can tell. And as I've said a couple times, I suspect they're the original strings. I mentioned before that the strings and the neck are out of kilter. They are not aligned well at all. The high E string is practically falling off the fretboard, and the low E string is well into the fretboard. And I'm going to show you exactly what I mean. I'll do a close-up of the fretboard. I believe the fix for this is first to see if I can't get the saddles adjusted so that improves the situation. The saddles are pretty cockeyed. And number two anyway, will be adjusting the neck itself. I did see a video online for a gentleman that showed how to do this, and I'll just mimic what he did in hopes of fixing that problem. So let me show you now what I mean by the strings being out of alignment here. And by the way, this is just exactly how I found it out of the box. So, and it hasn't been a pleasure playing, because every time I play that high E string, it tends to sometimes get caught under those frets, which have a bunch of fret sprouting problems anyway. You see how that high E string is practically falling off the fretboard there, whereas the low E string is well into the fretboard. So very much misaligned, and I will see what I can do about that. All right, now that you've taken a close look at my string problem here, misalignment on the fretboard and the neck here. It's time to get busy with the setup. I'm not going to have any audio during the setup, but I will film it for those that are interested. Again, I'm warning you out there, you don't want to model what you do after me. I'm just going to be doing what I learned myself from various YouTubers out there, and so wish me luck. Here we are, finally, at the end. Cannot tell you what a week it has been for me to knock out this video. It was pretty much 2 steps forward, 1 step back all week. Thank you for bearing with me, and thank you for hanging in there with me. We're going to call it a wrap this time. Just looking forward to next week where the actual mods begin finally. What I have in mind for next week, what the mods are to roll the fingerboard edges, to crown the frets, to dress the fret ends, and to create a better satin back of the neck. Wish me luck, and on to next week now. By the way, my motto about keeping it real has sure come into play this week. You may or may not like my videos I'm doing. They may or may not be your thing, but one thing I don't think anybody can dispute is I'm keeping it real. That's for sure. Warts and all. Until next week, take care.